Everybody thought we were crazy for dragging home this flimsy, crusty old Kellison drag car body, but I knew this thing had some history and I wanted to save it. And in this video, we're digging deep into the history books to show you this car's previous life when it was winning races and breaking records with a blown and injected 392 Chrysler Hemi. So if you saw the video of us discovering this Kellison body and then dragging it out of the scrapyard, you'll remember that it does have some markings left over. Even though the paint was pretty much baked off of this thing, you could still see a little bit of that hand lettering still surviving after all these years, almost 50 years out in the weather. And it was those markings that allowed us to identify and then document this car. So you'll see on the side of it here, it says Performance Center, and it's really faded, you can barely see it, but it's still hanging on there. And then on the back, we see a much more distinct marking. Back here it says B Altered, that was the class that the car ran in, and then the car's number 858. With this little bit of information, I reached out to Bob Rogers, who is a Kentucky drag racing historian, and it just so happens that he was directly connected to this car during the 1960s and 1970s. He immediately let me know that Lou Abel and Earl McDaniel campaigned this car from 1967 through the early 1970s. He sent me a picture of this car that left zero doubt as to this body's history. It was a direct match, the Performance Center lettering, the B Altered designation on the back, the car number, and even the teeth on the front grille. Some of those are still existing on this body. Even though the rest of it is crumbling and crispy after all these years out in the weather, a couple of those teeth are still hanging in there. Another thing Bob was able to give me was Earl McDaniel's contact information. Now, Earl was a partner on this car from pretty much day one, and he has a great memory as far as the history of this car, and he helped me determine the complete timeline, and I want to be able to share that here, starting way back at the beginning before this car ever even hit the track. Before I get too carried away, I want to remind you to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Give this video a thumbs up if you like it, and feel free to leave a comment down below. So the building process started in 1966, and that's when Lou bought a brand new body from Mr. Kellison himself, Jim Kellison. When the pieces started coming together on this car in late 1966, Lou brought in a friend, Earl McDaniel, to help him finish this car and help him when he took it to the track. And he actually had the Fry brothers from Dayton, Ohio start to build the frame for him. They were pretty well known for their gas dragster with twin Buick engines, and that's who Lou trusted to build the frame for this car. So they got started on it, and then something came up, and he actually had to go get his frame, and he had a local guy finish it for him. That local guy was Larry Trout, and he went ahead and finished all the frame and suspension. The body was sent to Gil Sheely of Lexington, Kentucky, and he prepped the fiberglass and painted it. A beautiful paint job. It had hand lettering on it with the AA modified sports car designation. The AA means that it was supercharged. And as you can see right here, it's got that 392 Hemi, it's got a big supercharger and an Indy fuel injector sitting on top. This was a serious combination. And if you think back to funny car history, this was pretty early on. Even though this technically wasn't a funny car, this never ran on nitromethane and it never ran as a funny car. But you'll see that the body flips up like a funny car, and you'll see that it has a lot of funny car elements, but it actually was designed for the AA modified sports car class. One of its first times out at Bluegrass Dragway, which is one of Lou's home tracks, he went 150 miles an hour in this car, which was a record at the time in the NHRA. Earl said that the early shakedown runs of this car looked very promising. They just had some bugs to work out, and the new car blues started setting in about the middle of the 1967 season. They had a broken transmission. They actually broke the rear end out from under the car and had to redesign some of the rear suspension. Another mishap was when that beautiful body actually broke. The nose broke off of it and dragged down the track and pretty much destroyed that beautiful body. But they had a local guy who pieced it back together for them. And you'll see in some of these pictures where the front end is in black primer, where they've patched this thing back together and made it to another race. Now you'll see that later on that they repainted the car. They painted it black, and it had these gold accents, these fogged panels around the doors and around the fenders. So at another test session, this time at Mountain Park Dragway, which is another local track to them, they ended up blowing the engine. And this 392 Hemi, even though that was a fairly popular design in the 60s, they couldn't find any parts to put this thing together. And they were just 2 weeks before trying to make the U.S. Nationals with this car. And you know, that's the biggest race of the year, and it was really important to these guys, and they were just about to throw in the towel when George Collett found them 3 rods and pistons. All 3 were different brands, but they put this engine back together and they made it to the U.S. Nationals. And you'll see in some of the early pictures that it's got a set of American Racing mag wheels on it, and it's got some M&H pie crust slicks. You know, they look cool, I love the way they look, but they did not hook up the same as the modern M&H or the modern Goodyear that was coming out that had a wrinkle sidewall. So they actually ended up borrowing a pair of rear wheels and tires. You'll see that they're mismatched now in this picture. It's got a set of Kragers on the back with some wrinkle wall slicks. He actually borrowed those tires and wheels from Paul Frost, who was a AA gas racer at the time, and they borrowed those tires and wheels and raced at the 1967 U.S. Nationals with this pieced together car. You know, the engine was just kind of hanging there, but they went out there and did very well. And it was outrunning the competition. They went a bunch of rounds on Sunday and actually won their division. And then on Monday's big eliminations at the U.S. Nationals, the car died in the staging lanes, and they were not able to make second round. And that was just like the biggest disappointment for them, but they knew that this car had potential. So at the end of the 1967 season, the modified sports car class rules got a big change, and this car got moved into the BB altered class. Anytime there's 2 letters at the front of that class designation, it means that it's a supercharged application. And the altered class, it was kind of like anything goes. And in a lot of cases, you know, the outdated funny cars and some of the AFX cars would end up running in that altered division. And for 1968, that's where this car found a home, was in BB altered, and it went to several events, lots of local events, but it also traveled to the 1968 NHRA Spring Nationals, which was in Englishtown, New Jersey. Pretty long haul for these guys, but they made it worthwhile because they actually won their class. So it was a big weekend for them. And as you can see, it's still looking the same as it did in the 1967 configuration, but they were obviously sneaking up on the setup on this car and figuring some things out on the engine, but they were still having transmission issues. That was the #1 problem with this car, was going through transmission breakage. In 1969, they continued to tweak that transmission and clutch setup, and the car was doing pretty well. It was still running under the national record, and it was going rounds at just about any race it went to. Now here's an interesting picture. This one was taken at the 1970 U.S. Nationals in Indianapolis. They made the race, but this time with a temporary Bantam body on it. Bob Rogers sent me this really rare picture of this Kellison, and it is just in primer. This is actually sort of in that transition from the black with gold accents to just the solid black paint job. And you can see it's just in primer. It's got some hand-painted letters on it that says the Black Bandit. You know, it's really cool to see when guys would just patch something up just good enough to make it to the racetrack. And that's exactly what they did right here. Earl actually stripped it down, and he fixed a lot of those fiberglass issues that was on the front of this car. He made a few other modifications on it, and he really straightened this thing up. And you know, now it's just solid black, and you can see that this thing is straight and that paint is slick. And this, to me, is my favorite combination, where the car is just black and it's just downright mean looking. It's got those gold wheels on it. You can see that they switched to a set of ET wheels on the back, a little bit bigger than what they had, and some bigger slicks. So another big change that happened in 1970 was a new engine combination. They had had really good luck out of that 392, but to make the most out of their cubic inch to weight ratio for the BB altered class, they built a 420 cubic inch early style Hemi. Moving into 1971, they made their longest trip ever with this car. They towed it all the way to Dallas, Texas for the NHRA Spring Nationals. And the car didn't do all that great down there in Texas, So they brought it back home and started doing their homework yet again, trying to figure out what the gremlin was that was holding them back. And ultimately it was something inside the engine. They tore this thing down and couldn't find anything wrong with it, but it just wasn't making power like it needed to. So they ended up parking the car for a whole year and got re-energized by 1972, about the middle of the year, and they decided instead of that 420 cubic inch blown and injected setup, they were going to put a 426, a modern Hemi, and just run fuel injection. No blower, just tame this thing down and go run and be altered. And that's exactly what they did with it. They were pretty happy with how it was running, 950s with an injected 426, but they actually found that the brakes were dragging. And once they fixed that, the very next pass down the track, it went from 950s to running a 926. It gained 0.3 of a second by fixing those brakes. And it shows them, going way back to when they had the blown and injected setup, that this gremlin might have been fighting them the whole way. In this car's final configuration, you can see that they added some hand lettering to that all black body, and it's got that Be Altered designation on the back of it. And you can also see that they've added some distinctive features to the front of this car, including some painted on eyeballs, some new teeth, and you can also see a tongue hanging out. So they'd add a little bit of personality to this car, even though it was kind of at the end of its life cycle. You know, they had kind of re-energized themselves on this car. And they went out there and this car did something pretty unusual that it didn't always do. It did a big giant wheel stand and then came down super hard and it bent the frame pretty badly. They ended up taking the car apart and they traded it off for another drag car project. And this car got bounced around to several different owners and ended up in the Louisville, Kentucky area where it sat for many, many years. Over 30 years in this one specific scrapyard, but it had actually been owned by a few different people in that area before it landed in its final resting place. Unfortunately, Lou ended up passing away in 2007, so a lot of this information came directly from Earl McDaniel. And he's got a great memory when it comes to these drag racing details because, again, he was living and breathing this stuff. So for him to rattle off some of these details, it's just like flipping back the pages in his memory book. So, you know, I was really thankful to have his information along with Bob Rogers' information, because between the two of those, we had lots of great info, lots of great history, and lots of great pictures to be able to tell this car's story. Sometimes I wish these old cars could talk because I know that they could tell us some wild and crazy stories, but since they can't, it's my job to seek out the history of these things, and that's something that I love to do. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching.